You should never applaud for somebody until you hear what they have to say.
We all know you, Howard.
We're applauding for Bernie. In the early 80s, I lived in Montana and I ran for Congress in Montana. I ran against a multi-term congressman. I lost by 3 percentage points. And a lot of people said to me, oh man, you have great name recognition, you ought to run again. And my wife told me, she says, you run again, you've got to find a new wife. So I decided I was not going to be a candidate, but I've been involved in politics for a long time. I was given the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill as a lobbyist. I worked for a small family farm organization, and I thought, what could be better? 535 members of Congress, I just absolutely knew they wanted to do what was right. And I thought all they really needed was the information, and they would look at it and say, you know, we should not be supporting the Prince of Liechtenstein, we should be supporting the small family farmers that were producing food for the American people. Well, I'll tell you, I went to Washington, D.C., and I got a real wake-up call. I did not know all 535 members of Congress, but I knew well over 400 of them. And I will tell you right now, in my opinion, there weren't more than a handful that I would ever let babysit my children. I learned that in Washington, D.C., it was the best job that they've ever had. Their main task was to get reelected. Here I was working with a small family farm organization, trying to support the people that were growing food for the people, growing food correctly, working with nature. And what I found was that Washington, D.C. was just awash with money. There was no amount of money that was not available if you were willing to sell your soul. Well, I met Bernie Sanders back there in the late 80s. He was a congressman from Vermont. He was the mayor of Burlington and did not have the greatest understanding of agriculture. But the interesting thing about Bernie was you could always go and talk to him. He was willing to listen. And if what you wanted to do was good for the people, he was a grand supporter. Now, Bernie did not always do what I wanted. But the interesting thing about it is he always told me the truth. And that's really unusual in Washington, D.C. Because in Washington, D.C., it is about here and now. What's in it for me? And here was Bernie Sanders, a guy that was an independent. You know, who in the world is ever going to get elected as an independent? But the interesting thing about Bernie is he cared about the people. Now, a lot of people say that Bernie is a socialist. I think Bernie is a populist. I believe that he cares about what's good for the people. When he decided to run for president, I thought it was exactly the right thing at the right time. Because I think people are fed up with big money politics. And I don't care whether you're on the Republican side or the Democratic side. Can you imagine anybody in good conscience stand up and say, I'm going to spend $1 billion in electing the people to the Congress of the United States and the President that will do what I think is right? $1 billion.
It is horrendous. And here is an independent standing up and saying, well, all I'm going to do is tell the people what I think should be done. Hillary was considered to be the odds-on favorite with over $100 million tooling along, nobody standing in her way from the nomination, and all of a sudden this one guy stands up and starts talking about common sense, talking about, I'm not for sale. I don't have a super PAC. I'm not going to spend all of my time going from donor to donor to donor. I'm just going to go out and talk to the people. I'm sure that there are many people in Hillary's campaign that when Bernie started running, they thought it was hilarious. All of a sudden, he sort of caught on. He was talking about things that were progressive. And so the Clinton campaign moved a little bit to the left. You know, if it's good for him, it ought to be good for us. But Hillary doesn't do her any good to stand up and throw rocks at Bernie, because what are you going to do to somebody that's talking about doing the right things? Talking about the minimum wage, talking about global warming, talking about climate change, talking about women's rights, talking about the minimum wage, and the list goes on and on. And if you notice, when Bernie is talking, there is no teleprompter. There's no written speech. There's no attempt to throw rocks at anybody else in the campaign. Bernie is about one thing. He tells you, this is where I think we should go. This is what I think we should do. And guess what? It has spread like a wildfire in California. All over this country, people have said, well, of course he doesn't have any chance, but I'm going to support him. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm going to do what I can. And I'm not going to whip out my checkbook and write him a check for $10 million, but I'll be more than happy to give him $50 a month. And hundreds of thousands of people have stepped forward. A while back they had a group of house parties all over this country. Well over 3,000 house parties where people just invited their friends in to sit down, and they had a talk by Bernie over the computer, and they ended up with thousands of people showed up and got involved in that. And people said, well, you know, the one I went to, there were, I think, 13 people there. And so the group said, well, you know, Ellensburg is definitely the center of the universe. We all know that. So we should probably do a Bernie event. And somebody says, well, where do we do it? And I said, well, how about the Odd Fellows? The name is perfect. So here we are, just a group of your friends and neighbors that looked at it and said, here's a guy who's speaking from his heart. Here's a person that cares more about our children and grandchildren. Here is somebody that is not beholden to the big money interests. Well, even back when we had the house parties. He was not leading in New Hampshire. He was not leading in Iowa. But as we sit here tonight, he's leading in New Hampshire. He's leading in Iowa. And what are they going to do? How are they going to discredit a guy that has been involved in public service for almost all of his life? He doesn't have millions of dollars. He doesn't have a big car. He doesn't have a big house. He doesn't have big campaign donors. But he's got the hearts and minds of millions and millions of Americans. I truly believe, I've been involved in politics for 40 years. There was never a time that I have felt as good about a campaign as I am about Bernie Sanders. I had great hopes when Barack Obama was elected. I thought, what could be better? We have a guy riding the wave of popular public opinion, has a majority in the House and the Senate. The guy said all of the right things. I just couldn't hardly wait until we didn't pass a health care law. What we would do is just change the age of Medicare from 65 to 45. All it took was an up and down vote in the House and the Senate. Had a majority in the House, had a majority in the Senate. But he had too much money that came from the pharmaceutical industry, had too much money that came from Wall Street. And so what we needed was something that carried his name, not addressing the needs of the country. His chief of staff in the White House basically went in and said to him, Mr. President, we can change the age of Medicare just like this. It will take in over 60% of the people in need of this country, and it is achievable right now. His chief of staff. But he had so many IOUs that he couldn't do that. And so we went and drug through the Congress and finally ended up with Obamacare. The Congress, even when they were debating health care, the committee in the Senate, chaired by the senator from the state of Montana, would not even allow anybody to come to the table and talk about single payer. Would not even consider, because he was bought and paid for. I'm tired of business as usual in Washington, D.C. I don't want to spend my time and effort getting more of the same. I think the most important thing today, to me, is global climate change. I don't know how many of you that watched the Republican debate last night. The gaggle of idiots, if I've ever seen it. I mean, when you look at the problems of this country, it was like everyone that we can talk about, we're going to blame on the president. If we don't blame it on him, we'll blame it on Hillary. But we're not going to talk to the American people about we control the House and the Senate. We're not gonna tell the American people that when this president came in, we were in the worst depression since the big depression back in the 30s. They are absolutely convinced that if they throw enough money at it, they will prevail. I'm here to tell you tonight, I don't believe that's true. There's one thing that I absolutely believe. When the people lead, the leaders will follow. Every person here tonight has the opportunity to become a sounding board for all of your friends and neighbors about Bernie Sanders. I don't want you to go to work tomorrow and point at somebody and say, let me tell you about the meeting I was at last night, man. You have one finger pointed at them, you have three pointed back at you. What you want to say is, man, I heard the craziest thing last night you ever heard of. They had this ex-farmer that personally knows Bernie Sanders, that actually worked with him 5 years, been in his office numerous times, and he really thinks highly of this guy. Maybe he deserves a second look. Maybe we can get people to get by the campaign ads and start listening to what the candidates really have to say. From the bottom of my soul, I believe that we have achieved a point in time when a grassroots movement can change this country. Ask yourself, should we not be addressing the infrastructure of the United States of America? Should we not have the capability where kids going to college without signing away their future with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans? Could we not have people working at the bottom of the scale at least earning enough to be able to put a roof over their heads and feed their families? Isn't it about time when we look at the fact that if we buy one less jet fighter, that we could send every kid in the United States to college? Isn't it about time that we treat all of our citizens with respect? Should we have a glass ceiling for women, that they can only reach a certain point? I don't know about you, but I have a number of daughters. I have to admit to you, my daughters by far are more skilled than the boys in our family. I look at Bernie Sanders and I say, Bernie, you always told me the truth. You didn't always do what I wanted, but you told me the truth. 5 years. What he gave me in 5 years of being a true human being, a true legislator, a true friend of the people, I'm willing to give him my time and effort to see whether my feeling is correct. Why not elect a president of the United States from the grassroots And what better place to start than right here, right now, right tonight, and feel good about the person you're supporting for the biggest office in the United States of America. I would be more than happy to answer any question you would like about my knowledge of Bernie. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you would like about Washington, D.C. But be careful, because I will tell the truth.
I wish you could think of a good question on those subjects, but I'm allergic to the whole topic. But this is a question I have. I hope I don't offend anybody.
Go right ahead, that's what we're here.
Ellensburg is so conservative. How do you see people who would like to, like, maybe open some minds? How do you do that?
Well, the first thing is, let's stop and take a look at it. The question is, Ellensburg is so conservative, how do we do anything about it? Do you realize the majority of Ellensburg are progressive?
No.
The majority of the county surrounding Ellensburg are to the right of Attila the Hun, but the majority of the people in Ellensburg are progressive. Do you think when we talk about the issues of fairness, of education, that the people that are living outside of town are going to look at it and say, well, I'm willing to vote again to cut my nose off of my face, I'm going to vote what's works for me no matter what. I'm going to feel like I came from Kansas. I'm going to commit suicide again. I don't think so. I think when we look at this summer, is there anybody here that was concerned about how dry it was? Is there anybody here that was concerned about the fires? Do you think they just came biblically? That God up there said, people in Washington, we've got to get even. They shot at the wrong Washington. We have the most dire future in the world that is facing us if we do not do what we can about global warming, global climate change right now. I would be willing, and I will try in this campaign to talk to even the people that are totally opposed to what I believe in. I am willing to tell you that Bernie Sanders will be the only candidate that will stand up and talk about global climate change with anything other than saying, oh, it's going to cost us jobs. Do you realize right now there are twice as many jobs in solar as there are in the coal industry in the United States of America? Twice as many. How many more should we have? Do you think building wind farms and putting up solar panels isn't the future?
I came here tonight to find out what we might do, and this is kind of preaching to the choir here, we're all on board. Is there a strategy to go from here out into the greater community and prepare for the caucus coming up? I would like to see how what opportunities there are amongst us here to get out. I believe there really is common ground among the conservatives, or however you want to paint people. Everybody resonates with getting money out of politics, and so I just want to know how we can go from this room out into the community, and what I'd like to get involved in that.
Okay, here's what the name of the game is tonight. We will spend as much time as the group would like about talking of the issues and where Bernie Sanders stands. We want to feel comfortable that everybody here has an opportunity to say what they want, to learn what they want. When this formal gathering is over, the people that want to become part of the organizing committee of moving this campaign forward in Ellensburg will stay and will say, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? And the people that stay are going to stay for the reason that they know this is not about, well, we're going to stay and eat the cookies and drink the tea. We're going to stay and get a job because it's important that we move forward. You know, I thought when I ran in the early 80s that money was pervasive. It is nothing compared to what it is today. If that's all it is, then all we need to do is get a computer, total up the amount of money that people are willing to put in, and we just elect the person that's going to provide the patronage for the biggest donors. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk about it. We're going to answer your questions at the end of it. The people that stay and want to be part of it, we're going to decide who does what and where we go from here. Because this isn't an end all. This is a start of where we're going to go. Are there other questions?
I just wanted to say something about that. We have formed this small group that went to the first house party in June. And there's a core of us that have been active on, we have a Facebook page called Bern for Bernie. If you're on Facebook, you can sign up for it. We're going to have a sign-up sheet to get people's names and email addresses so we can get in touch with people. I know that it's hard to go out and talk to people, especially politics is such a touchy subject with a lot of people, and they don't want to hear it. And the first thing they'll say is, oh, he's a socialist, I could never vote for him. And they don't even know what that means. And Bernie is not getting the media attention that he should be getting. That's just a fact. The big corporate media, they don't want to talk about him because they do not want Bernie Sanders elected. And so they're going to do everything they can to stifle him. So a mantra for me is we have to be the media. We do. We have to go out and talk to friends, talk to neighbors, knock on doors, make phone calls, whatever it takes to get the word out. So we are going to have a sign-up sheet, and we would love more people to join our group. Because it's going to start really heating up as it gets closer. And it's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of work. And one thing Bernie always says in every speech I've heard him, he says, if you think electing President Sanders is going to fix the mess that this country's in, you're sorely mistaken. It is going to take a grassroots movement from all of us to work together to change this corrupt system. And he means that. And so my feeling is, number one important thing, we have to get people to register and to go to the caucus in our state. Because he has to beat Hillary. That's number one. If he gets the Democratic nomination, he will win. But number one is we have got to get people registered and to the caucus. So we welcome anybody that wants to help.
So it would be one thing to get Bernie elected, as it was one thing to get Obama elected. And I don't put everything that Obama did wrong at the feet of money. It's also filibustering and other things that came up, even when there was a majority in Congress. So my way of thinking about it is that we not only have to back Bernie, but we have to figure out who locally to back, who are going to be populist progressives, in my sense, progressive is you try and solve a problem, you come up with a solution, you try it out for a while, it works, cool, it doesn't, fix it. So, you know, even no matter who is elected, we need to be looking at a more local level between Congress and the Senate and Washington State Congress and the Senate. So, I'm just asking about how that's gonna be linked up with whatever any of us might wanna do about it.
I totally agree, and I personally believe that you cannot win the White House without winning the courthouse. And if we, you know, look at it, Ellensburg, the majority of people living in Ellensburg are progressive. The people in Ellensburg are equal to the people that live outside in the rest of the county. I think the wake-up call we got this year, whether we're talking about the fires or lack of rain or the issues goes on, if you look at the voting record of our representative, it's sad. If we, working at the local level, cannot convince the majority of people that live in this district that we are not well represented, then maybe we deserve what we're going to get. But I think we can win both at the state, the representative level and the presidential level, and I think we can win at the senatorial level. But it's not gonna be easy. It's not gonna be, you know, I'm just gonna do it in my spare time. We've gotta commit ourselves.
When is caucus in? I was actually just gonna talk about that. So briefly in respect to the question about how Ellensburg is conservative, it actually is a progressive city, but the Kittitas County Democrats recently did a straw poll, and Bernie Sanders is like, as of right now, most people that participated in the poll said that they would caucus for Bernie. So the most important thing that we have to worry about right now is not the conservatives, it's getting to the caucus.